The People's Business is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
Hello and welcome to The People's Business. I'm Wendy Burke. Tonight's discussion will be looking at reparations and the road ahead. Yes, what progress have we been making in this process of reparatory justice? To help us discuss the topic tonight are my guests, Trevor Prescod, MP, who's also the chairman of the National Task Force on Reparations. Joining him is Mr. Anthony Reid. He's a member of the National Task Force, as well as Cikiah Thomas, who's the outgoing co-chairman of the Global African Congress. I want to welcome you all, gentlemen, to tonight's discussion. And when we come back, we will have our panelists speak to you on the road ahead, as well as inviting our calls from you, our audience. We'll be back after the break. To Trevor Prescod, who is the chairman of the National Task Force on Reparations. Mr. Prescod, where are we on this road toward getting reparations?
First of all, good night to you, Sister Wendy, and the entire team, panelists here. We're making some progress. You know, everybody would love to resolve all the issues in 24 hours, but that is not reality. We have already established a CARICOM Reparation Commission. We also have a ministerial body that is responsible for that commission itself. The Prime Minister Motley is also the head of the ministerial team in CARICOM. I am the head of the task force here in Barbados. We start off with a 10-point plan. I always describe the 10-point plan as very generic, and that we have to look at the various elements within the individual planks of the 10-point plan and see how we go forward. So that is something that we keep doing every time we get together. We do it at a local level, we do it at an international level. But we're also into, I want to say, an expansionist kind of program, not like the Monroe Doctrine, where the Americans want to get every piece of land across the entire universe. They're trying to make connections with various groups with a common interest. So apart from the CARICOM Commission, there's also another institution. There's a North African American Reparation Commission. We're working in collaboration with trade union organizations, intellectuals, and grassroots individuals across the entire globe. On the African continent, in North America, in the UK, they're also working with also political entities across the entire world, because this call for reparation is really a global call.
Okay. That's why we have groups like the Global African Congress as well on board. Good night to you, Mr. Cikiah Thomas. Coming out of your conference, where would you say we are in the road, along this road toward getting reparations?
Yes, good night, Wendy, as well as good night to my Barbados family. Coming out of the conference, I think we have made some significant progress in a number of areas. We begin to deepen the relationship between civil society and some of the institutions like the University of the West Indies, specifically Keyville campus. Um, we have established some closer relationship with, for example, the non-speaking English Caribbean, and that is a major plus in my book. We have also established some, not so much as established, but begin to revisit something that were negligent about, and that is to ignore the issues of the remaining countries under direct colonialism in the Caribbean. We were treated to a number of specific case issues that sensitize us to the urgency of now. And so we in the Global African Congress have decided that we will make this one of our focus, as well as continue to lobby and push the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean government, that they should be doing more and they can be doing more. So I think to that extent, that is two of the issues that I see as a milestone that we're moving forward with the reparation agenda.
Okay. So when we're talking about trying to convince some of these other countries that are still under colonial rule to change, we know Barbados has become a republic. There are one or two others throughout CARICOM who are republic and no longer have the crown as head of their countries. But really and truly, when you look at it, is it going to be that easy to convince them to move off of that path and join you all on the road to reparations? I mean, we've not even been able to get a formal apology as yet out of the British government.
Well, look at it this way, Wendy. What was the key in the Barbados strategy? It was leadership. Plain and simple. Barbados' key to success is a question of leadership. You have a leadership of the country at this time who decided that, look, enough is enough. There's no longer any need to accommodate an oppressive institution. There's no need to continue to make any excuse. And she moved straight forward ahead. And what has been the result? A lot of people were predicting, looking at the media, a lot of people were predicting chaos, a whole bunch of other things falling out. I have not seen any sign of that. In fact, as you know, I lived in Canada, and with the passing of the Queen, there was a tremendous amount of debate about the future of the monarchy. And for the last 24 hours or 48 hours, Barbados is in the news every day. Barbados is seen as a leader, as taking a very strong leadership position in asserting itself for the rights of those of the conditions, the structural inequality in the world, and the rights of those who are the enslaved, the descendants of the enslaved. And Barbados is seen as a champion of pushing the cause to ensure that the enslavers are held accountable. So for me, it's a question of leadership. It's not a question of the remaining countries that that we have to depend on the oppressor to say, well, you know, it's time for us to do it. If the Caribbean, English-speaking Caribbean, come together, there's a whole series of mechanisms in the United Nations, and with the kind of political pressure, the kind of mobilization, I think we can get the job done.
Mobilization. I'm going to go over now to Anthony Reid, who's one of the members of the local task force, and he's on the ground dealing with the various NGOs, the Rastafari community, all of the other pressure groups who have been calling for reparations. Anthony, can you tell me, in terms of where you're at now in the work that's been going on, what's the mindset of our people and how prepared are they to continue this fight towards reparatory justice?
Right, well, good night, Barbados. Good night, Wendy. The issue of preparation of the masses, as we would say, that is now our focal point, really. We've gotten CARICOM mobilized and so on. Mr. Prescod would have mentioned the 10-point reparations plan a bit earlier. What we find we now need to do really is to bring the people along with us. And so we've been looking at plans for mass education, education on the ground. We have looked at a strategy or a number of strategies really to have reparations included in the school curricula. It wouldn't be coming in necessarily as any new topic in a sense, but we look to see where we can splice it into the existing curriculum. We are strategizing and still organizing to see how we can actually go out and meet with the masses of the people on the ground. Because we definitely need to bring the people along. We listen to discussions on the media and so on. We get to understand that there's still quite a few people who do not understand, who do not fully understand the concept of reparations. And so what we definitely need to do is to mobilize now and organize ourselves that we can meet the masses on the ground and bring them up to speed with what it is that we are actually aiming for.
Okay, one of your educational platforms thus far has been using social media and having young people sign on to the movement. Has that brought the type of fruit and influence that you wanted to get out of it?
That is still fairly early in the makings, but so far, yes, we are seeing some progress. I don't think as much as we would like. But it is still, that program is still quite early in the making. We have our young people on board. We're looking to bring them more up to speed. But as time goes on, we imagine that we will be able to flood the social media with lots of information and to be able to correct and so on. For instance, we hear people talking about, receiving a check and that kind of thing. So we want to dispel those myths, and hopefully through the young people and social media, we can reach them and get accurate information as to what it is we're really aiming for out there.
Okay, I'm glad you raised the issue of getting that check. And this is where I would want to bring Mr. Prescod back in, because in terms of creating the structure for how we want the outlay of the reparations to go, I remember the university speaking about the creation of a center, basically to help guide us forward to ensure that, individuals understand all that happened from our transition from slavery to now, and ensuring that the monies are used to be able to fund educational programs and so on across the continent for our people. How do you see these reparations being utilized, Mr. Prescod?
Well, first of all, I think Tony was attempting to make the point that to focus exclusively on money is a myth. Reparations will come in many different forms. They've had psychological damage as a consequence of enslavement, as a consequence of all the atrocities that we had to endure, not only through slavery, but also through the period of colonialization. We also fully aware that we are being miseducated, even in terms of what our history is supposed to be. We're doing all of those things with part of reparatory justice, the manner in which we will conduct our re-education of our people. Lots of the limited history which was given to us was impregnated with misrepresentations. We're now having a body of Caribbean intellectuals and black intellectuals across the Western world that is really providing us with what is considered by me as the truth. We obviously have to put in place lots of educational programs, and I believe that in addition to those of us who are fairly well enlightened at this moment, I'm not only talking about the task force or the Global African Congress, I'm talking about a whole body of intellectuals from the University of the West Indies here and other black universities across the Western world and on the African continent. There will provide us with a set of consciousness and we
And
will
some
be in
direction.
possession of good evidence to support the arguments that we'll be advancing ultimately at the level of an international court and the
Okay.
convincing of the Bahraini public of this being an important public issue that they
Okay.
need to pay some attention to.
When we come back, we'll talk more about that court and what are some of the things we'll be presenting on. We'll get the African Congress to tell us some more about the work they've been doing on their end to help bring it about as well. Because it's not just a Barbados fight, it's not just a Trinidad fight, it's a global fight for all who have been enslaved. You're listening to The People's Business. We'll be back after the break. And we're back. We're talking reparations, the road ahead. And this is where you, our audience, get the opportunity to call in. Let us know what your views are. Raise questions with our panelists who are with us tonight. Trevor Prescod, Anthony Reid, and Cikiah Thomas of the Global African Congress. Our numbers to call, 228-5562, 228-5563, if you wish to get in on the program. That's where you can reach us. Now, if I could go over to Mr. Thomas, to look at the fact that we as a world, those from the continent, are coming together with those from the Caribbean, and we're looking at all that we've been taken through by force, and we're trying to get a sense of not only understanding, but a sense of justice for our people. What more in terms of being able to link both the political directorate as well as the NGO movement do you think needs to be done to help strengthen our cause?
Wendy, before I answer that question specifically, the last topic but that Tony and Trevor responded to about the monetary issue, it's a very interesting one. You know, I've been looking at that issue. Why are we so afraid to discuss the money? And money is tied into the question of race. Two very subject we do not want to discuss. Reparation is about race. It's about those who enslave, the enslaver, and those who were enslaved. Discussing race is a very uncomfortable issue. Discussing money is a very uncomfortable issue. But I've observed the situation is that as it unfolded in Ukraine in the last couple of months. And the very countries that are telling us, are telling their population, because they're feeding directly to a white population, that look, these black people are asking for money and it's going to break our treasure. So in a way, it's a coded language to enhance and to embrace the racist, institutionalized racist argument. But suddenly, if we begin to deconstruct what is happening over the last couple of months, specifically around the Ukraine situation, we recognize money couldn't have been the issue. Why is it that the United States, for example, and Britain and all of those countries and Canada could find so much money to pump into the war in Ukraine, but they can't find it to pay reparation? And I want to leave, I want us to think and to ponder on that question and to show that the weapon is being used precisely because it boils down to a very uncomfortable conversation that we have in different parts of the world, and that is the question of race. So I will leave leave that
Okay.
for us to
Before we
think about.
continue to discuss whether we're in a position of comfort or discomfort, we'll take a caller. Good evening to you.
Yes, good evening. I would like to make a contribution, not so much a question, but in my contribution, are you hearing me?
Yeah, well, don't listen to your television. Just speak to me through your telephone.
Yes, I would like to make a contribution that we should take note of. Number one, the British system is based on symbolism and law. So we could talk all day about reparations, but we should now take a leaf out of the people from Martinique and Guadeloupe that is taking France to court for reparations. Also, we should also take note that in 2018, the then Prime Minister of England apologized to the Commonwealth heads of state for what the British government policies that violated the human rights of the people from the 1950s and 70s. And following that apology, Windrush compensation scheme was set up in 2019. That Windrush compensation scheme was to stop the people whose human rights violation was violated, like myself, from pursuing legal action, and they have decided to make compensation. Now, the people of Barbados and the Caribbean need to, there are thousands of us that are entitled to compensation from the Windrush generation scheme, that the governments of the Caribbean need to mobilize and inform their people to claim their compensation. It's a swing door to reparation. So all the talking that we're talking, we need to take action.
Okay, thank you, caller. Gentlemen, he is bursting the bridge between the Windrush situation and the slavery reparations that we are speaking to. What are your thoughts on this? We'll begin with you, Anthony.
I guess we can see from the bit I know of the Windrush situation, we can see that it is tied to racism and racial discrimination, which is really a fallout, a legacy of the whole slavery and colonial experience. So when we look at reparations, we tend to look at not only the period of slavery in itself, but the legacy of slavery and colonialism. So from that end, yes, I can see where we could make the connection. I guess Elder Larry is suggesting that, we could use that as a stepping stone. Law is not really one of my strong points, so I wouldn't attempt to determine whether or not Elder Larry's argument we can use that as a stepping stone and so on is a strong legal strategy. I'd have to leave that more to Cikiah and probably Trevor.
Okay. We have another caller. Good evening to you.
Hello? I'm hearing you?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment and ask a question. We talk about reparations and getting back money and so on, right? But some historians will tell you that the whole racist thing started down here in the West Indies, especially Barbados, white on black. And we still have a structure in which the land in Barbados is basically owned by the whites. These are the people that we should be getting reparations from, right? It is amazing to me that in this day and age, you could see white people in this country selling land by the ounce, I call it, you know, that black people work on for 300 years.
Okay. Mr. Prescod, I'll leave this one to you because I know you're very passionate about these lands and whose hands they're in and how they're being passed on.
Land reform is also an element of reparations. Land distribution. Racism is an element of reparations. Repatriation is an element of reparations. So when that's why I believe, that's why I said that we don't, when people restrain the debate to just financial benefits from the discussions, to me that shows that they're not fully comprehensive of our definition of what constitutes reparation. I don't know if it's a textbook definition, but you obviously recognize that we have a 10-point plan, and I told you that within the 10-point plan there are various elements that will come from the 10-point plan, like education and things of that nature. So I want people to see reparation in a wide context, that we have been deprived of ownership of land, especially the enslaved people. We had to face a lot of social and economic inhibitions within the banking sector. So when we begin to talk about reparations, we are talking about a very elastic, a very wide subject. And I would like them to see that. I just want the call to know that we have not excluded land distribution, because I am very concerned about the land distribution and ownership of land, especially that land owned by the tracts in St. George. Even lands that used to be owned by the royal family and the Lascelles in the Bell. And those things are very much part of our agenda, not only here in Barbados, but in Jamaica and many other parts of the Western world for sure. And the ownership of the resources in the continent of Africa. Those are some of our conversations. And I know that somebody spoke about the what is happening in Martinique, what is happening in Guadeloupe, and those who went to the Global African Congress conference on reparation, we had a massive delegation that came in from Martinique and Guadeloupe. We've actually committed ourselves to helping them with the fight against French colonialism. We had discussions on a wider understanding of what constitutes the Caribbean people, and not just the states that were colonized by the British itself. And, we are trying to bring all of those people who have been oppressed through slavery, and even the indigenous people of the Caribbean, including the Asiatic people in the Caribbean, into this battle. And we're going to find strategic ways of doing things, so it's not just a straightforward confrontation. We have to be tactical, we have to be strategic, and the reparation fight is about taking into consideration all of those entities.
Okay, and now Mr. Prescod has spoken about this strategy. What's your take on it, Mr. Thomas?
Well, clearly, the question of land distribution has to be part of the agenda. We can't separate land from wealth. You know, it's a fundamental part of wealth generation and wealth creation. So, and we do know that at the time of emancipation, you know, it was on the law book as part of the racist institutionalized law that black people were not allowed to own land and to own business, whereas the descendants of, for example, the enslaved in Barbados would have been able to own land and acquire land. So that still remains an issue, and how we deal with that issue domestically remain to be seen.
Okay.
But certainly the question of land, it's important. I want to comment though on the whole thing.
Just a minute. We have a caller on the line before you go ahead.
discussion, right? And
Okay, continue with your comment, Mr. Thomas. We seem to have lost that caller.
Yeah, and I was saying we had to be careful when we um, don't conflate the Windrush situation with enslavement. The Windrush, as you know, started immediately after World War II, and yes, it was a very, very embarrassing thing for the British government. And I haven't seen the text of the British Prime Minister's apology, the British Prime Minister in 2018. I haven't seen the text of it. I would have to see it in order to be able to make some comment on it, at least informed comment. But I think we have to be very careful of not equating that kind of apology to the kind of apology that is needed for the enslavement and slave trade of African people.
So
Um, to the best of my knowledge, uh, since the World Conference Against Racism in 2001, Tony Blair have made it clear that it was not illegal, and subsequent British Prime Minister and official kept saying it was not illegal. So that is to say, they're not about to apologize for what they did, and they still maintain that position. So the lawyers will tell you there's a lot of um, congruency between the acknowledgement and the legal action that has to be taken. But having said that, though, I think the discussion have evolved with the lawyers, and the lawyers is talking about whose court is it. So is it a matter of getting into the court that they have established, or are we looking at another legal strategy that will take us there? And the
Okay.
consensus is that we'll take another legal strategy.
All righty. Well, we'll talk more about that legal strategy when we return after the break. And we're back. If you're now joining us, the topic this evening is Reparations, the Road Ahead. My panelists, Trevor Prescod, the chair of the National Task Force on Reparations, Anthony Reid, a member of that task force, and Cikiah Thomas, the outgoing co-chair of the Global African Congress. Now, before we went off to the break, we were talking about plans, and we were also talking about how we will actually wage this battle in terms of being able to seek these reparations when it comes to the legality and arguing in a court. Mr. Thomas is suggesting that if it's the court as we know it, they may not be the justice which we want coming forward, and that it should be probably on our terms. Do you see that happening, Mr. Prescod?
But first of all, we have already been engaged in having discussions with institutions who are fully conscious that they accumulated the wealth that drove the institution up to today as a consequence of plundering the resources of the Caribbean, North America, and South America, and Africa itself. There are institutions well known institutions owned by Rothschilds, many other different universities in the United States of America that are prestigious. And many of our people say we would love to go to those universities. They are real. We have started identifying institutions across Europe that have accumulated their wealth as a result of the resources coming out of Barbados itself, out of sugar, out of the plantations and the labor of many persons in Barbados. I don't know. I don't believe that these things are just straightforward. We're not only going to the international. We ultimately might have to go there, but I'm saying that we're still in a stage of being strategic. So there are negotiations with individuals, there are negotiations with institutions. The university has been a beneficiary of negotiations with another university in England, and that university contributes to UWI because the foundation of the university itself rests on the money coming out of slavery in the region. So there are benefits that are coming out of that's why I told you that we're making progress. At some point, as a result of all the research that we're doing, we would be in a position to quantify. We would be in a position to quantify what our demands are and what the value of those demands in modern time against what the historic demand, the historic value would have been. Those things we work out. But we also have other legal matters. I mean, for example, look at what occurred in the early 20th century. Our people migrated because of hardship, because of how the planters raped the country, drive lots of people into unemployment, and we saw major migration into Panama in up to the 1920s. When the silver men, which are the black people who were working in Panama, sent back their money home to buy lands, these people placed additional inhibitions in our way in relation to the ownership of land. So we know that this call is not only about money; it's about what they have done to us in trying to restrict our development as a people, right? And how they restrict us from getting involved in business. And some people like to talk about small business, but we want also big businesses. And when we have big businesses, we want the state also to give the assistance from big businesses, especially owned by black people, that will help us to contribute to our own development as a people. So there is many issues that we have to tackle, and sometimes looking at these things in a very unilinear way is not really a reflection of the reality which we face in this challenge, especially making this call for reparations.
Okay, if I can come to you now, Cikiah, we were talking about a while back about how it has impacted on the minds of our people and on their emotions and the state that it has left us in. At the present moment in time, is the African Congress doing any specific programming to help our people, males, females, or youth, deal with those issues that would have been brought about because of what we would have gone through, what our forefathers went through with colonization?
In some jurisdictions, yes. Like for example, in Toronto, in Ontario, where I live, the Ontario government is the largest employer of black people in Canada. Right across the country, the Ontario government is. And we embark on a program taken out of the Durban Declaration, a program of action signed specifically by the federal government. And we specifically embark on a program and push the government to look at anti-black systemic racism. What does it look like? The impact, the healthcare impact, the mental health, the relationship between mental health and racism. And I must say that we were successful in getting the government to do a third party review with a whole host of specialists, consultants, specialists in the area of anti black racism and understanding organizational systems. And among the recommendation that was made, we asked the anterior government to apologize, and they issue a public apology, and they have started a program of treatment. So, as an employee or as a person who delivers service, you can in fact go and get specific um, culturally sensitive program to deal with anti-black racism. So, in some jurisdiction, yes, we do have it, and I must dare say that Ontario is probably the only jurisdiction in the world right now that has an anti-black, anti-racism legislation and established uh, an, an office that deals specifically with the question of race. So yes, these are small victories, but and can be used as a prototype in other jurisdiction. So
Okay.
yes, and the question of mental health and to deal with it. But there's a larger issue, and I've seen Hilary Beckles spoke quite eloquently of one. And I remember some of our colleagues in Cobra have put forward some very concrete programs to deal with some of the health issues. For example, in Cobra developed a strategic plan that called for mobile health service. So if you live in a particular community and there was some crisis, we could have a mobile vehicle dispatch the community with a specialist to deal with whatever family crisis or whatever individual crisis they are in that community. Of course, that called for a whole host of resources, but nevertheless, some concrete plan that I think it's
It's
doable.
possible to explore. Okay. We have a
But I
caller on
want
the
to say,
line. Just a minute. Yeah, just want to go to the caller. For they might want you to elaborate in another direction. Good evening.
Hi, good evening to the host and good evening to the panel. Um,
Go right
right,
ahead.
thank you. I just want to say that I want to commend and thank all the various individuals who continue to, struggle for justice and reparations for the descendants of enslaved African peoples. Just briefly on the question of land reform, my understanding is that when other Caribbean peoples were released from slavery, so-called abolition, they were actually given plots of land, and we in Barbados were peculiar in that we were never given any land, so we always remain extremely vulnerable. I heard Mr. Prescod reference the psychological trauma and damage, right, of slavery and colonization, and you also mentioned the problems with our education system. Very relevant. But what I would like the panel to comment on, um, two areas: the brainwashing and misleading of Black Barbadians by counterfeit religions. I'm convinced that false religions, right, have inflicted and continue to inflict enormous psychological damage on the dignity and self-esteem of Black Barbadians and Black people in general. I'd like to comment on that. And I would
Okay.
also just briefly suggest that we need to be brave and honest enough to conflict the assertion that while we must hold the enslavers and colonizers to account for the atrocities of slavery, we also need to confront the harsh reality that we, by our own misconduct and violation of certain divine principles, contributed to our own downfall. And we need to face up that reality going forward. Thank you.
Okay, Tony, I'll leave this one to you. In terms of a brainwashing, has religion been impacting on us so severely that we don't see the need to be on this particular road that we're discussing tonight?
There was definitely a brainwashing, Wendy. It wasn't how should I say it, by divine intervention or any sudden humanitarian awareness that the ban on education and Christianization of the enslaved would have been lifted on the eve of emancipation. What happened was that in moving towards emancipation, the oppressors, the slave owners, had to come up with a new form of slavery rather than physical slavery. They moved towards, or more heavily towards, mental slavery. This is why just before emancipation, the enslaved were not to be baptized, they were not to be educated. But then on the eve of emancipation, we saw schools being established on some plantations. And the purpose of these schools was to indoctrinate the enslaved that upon emancipation, they were to accept their status as servants. So the educational system in these colonies from the beginning, in fact, I dare say the educational system for the masses, because a similar thing happened in England as well. Once they moved toward educating the masses, the purpose of the education was to brainwash the masses, was to brainwash the formerly enslaved into accepting their status in the society.
Okay.
So Brother Prescod would have mentioned earlier, for instance, about the extensive amount of work that is being done. And part of the whole reparatory work really is a rewriting of the history, is a re-understanding of our experience. One of the things that we must be able to do, for instance, is do the work to allow people to understand that religion is that sacred part of people's culture, that part that deals with divinity and so on. And so religion varies from culture to culture. We now have to re-educate our people to the point that they can accept that our ancestors were not backward demon worshippers and so on, but rather they had their unique understanding of the cosmos. They had their unique understanding of the divine, and it must be respected. So part of the educational system tied with the church was to reject our African heritage, was to reject our African culture, was to reject our African spirituality. Part of the reparatory work now is to restore that. However, as Elder Cikiah would have been saying earlier, to do all this work takes money. So yes, there's a monetary component, because we would want to have then financing, or at least access to publications and so on, that we can put this re-understanding of our cultural heritage out there for the masses.
Okay.
So there's a lot of work to be done.
We have a call on the line. Good evening to you.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for taking my call. My question is, I'm curious how the climate crisis is being factored into reparations, because a lot of the time you hear that slavery happened a long time ago, but climate change is happening now, and the cotton and all the inputs were produced by slavery, and it's the same actors. And so that's really my question. Like, how are we quantifying the damage? Like, is that being taken into account?
Okay.
Thank you.
Which of you gentlemen wants to take this question?
I think the Prime Minister.
I will try to.
Okay, Cikiah had started, Mr. Prescod,
Yeah,
and then we'll let you continue.
I think the Prime Minister have articulated that fairly well at one of those international climate conferences. But quite apart, there's no doubt about the linkage between the enslavement and the destruction of the environment. The destruction of the environment was not a recent phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon that started in the last 50 years, but started. There's a whole host of areas that we could begin to dig deep and identify specific things that happened during enslavement and the destruction of the environment. For a simple thing like, for example, the monocultural approach, where how the land was utilized, for example, for just like cane, as opposed to multiple crop and re-energize and so on and so forth. So that is one aspect of the destruction of the environment. There's a whole host of relationship that has to be dealt with.
Okay. If I can just go to Mr.
Right.
Prescod now for his thoughts on it, Cikiah. Yes, Mr.
The
Prescod.
reality is that there is a cause for climate change, and that cause rests in industrialization. Industrialization, industrialization advanced in the manner in which it has advanced as a consequence of the wealth also that was extracted out of the sugar industry, and which strengthened the wealth of the British government and subsequently the U.S. government to propel the Industrial Revolution. That Industrial Revolution was driven by a specific type of energy, and that energy is oil. You had wind energy, you had water energy. They used oil because it was the most effective for them. They put it in ships, they put it in the machinery, they put it in planes, right? And they discharge the most pollution in the atmosphere that has given damage to the ozone layer, has affected the manner in which we are witnessing the changes in the environment at present.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. Now,
But
we have...
is a reality.
Yes,
It's
it
a
is.
reality, and the reality also points a finger directly at the industrial countries. I probably one might be
Which are
trouble
among the same countries that we want to get our reparations from.
reparations.
Right, and if we
Exactly.
can add to that, the fact that we're in a hurricane belt, and as a result of climate change, we are seeing more intense, much stronger hurricanes and so on. So we are directly at risk as a result of that activity.
Yes, we are. Okay, we're going to take a break, gentlemen, and when we come back, we're going to have some parting words from you, our panelists, in terms of the road that we're currently on and where each of you and your organizations are guiding it so that we can perhaps get some closure as we move, say, maybe toward 2025 or so, when we can actually see us turning the corner on the realization of reparations. The People's Business will be back. And we're back. We're talking about reparations, the road ahead. And with me are Trevor Prescod, Anthony Reid, and Cikiah Thomas. Gentlemen, 30 seconds, your parting shot in terms of where we need to be to get to the end of this road, which is ahead. I'll start with you first, Tony.
Right, okay. Well, Wendy, we're in the technological age. So I think one of the things that we would want to be focusing on is technological transfer. We want to make sure that included in whatever reparatory justice there is, there's ready access to the advances in technology. We're also in a sort of health crisis, global health crisis, lots of diabetes, hypertension, and so on. What we would want to be calling for as well is that when research is being done in terms of medication, treatment, whatever, that African people are included in these studies. Currently, as it stands, most of the medication and so on, most of even the approaches to healthcare are Eurocentric. We would want
Okay.
to see a more African-centered approach
Yeah, okay.
included.
Cikiah?
Wendy, my parting word is that as someone involved in the reparation movement, sometimes it's very difficult to assess when we're making progress. How do you measure some of our deliverables? What are the quantities? What do we look for to ensure that we are making progress? And I would say to you that just over the last couple of years, the distinct, a different group of people who thought it was impossible to get reparation years ago and are calling for discussion and taking initiative to organize discussion themselves and invite many of us to come and dialogue with them. For me, it's a qualitative and quantitative changes. And so I see the reparation movement evolving pretty much in the same way as the anti-apartheid movement evolving in Southern Africa, as well as the civil rights movement. And I think we are at that point and that stage. And it's on that basis I have a lot of confidence that what will emerge with the legal strategy in
Okay.
public opinion.
Okay, Trevor, quickly before we wrap up.
Yes, this is a major contemporary public issue. I'm going to be inviting you, the media, young people, the Rastafarian community, and I believe that we have a moral duty to always embrace the Rastafarian community. They touch very strongly on one of the elements related to reparations, and that as a repatriation. We just got to respect that this is a new public issue. It is a work in progress. I can't tell you that we will be able to reach the ultimate goal tomorrow, but what I can tell you is that we are gradually making the required progress. But we have to have an intensive education and a public program.
Okay.
Probably will use that Freedom Park a little more so that the public can get involved in these discussions.
Okay. Gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for joining me this evening on this topic. Quite interesting. Let's hope that we're stimulating the minds of more people to actually get involved and join us in this journey as we're on the road toward reparations. Thank you once again for joining us. This has been The People's Business. I'm Wendy Burke.